Hey, so in this video, I'm going to show you how I replaced the factory drain valve that came with my water heater with a much bigger, more robust, easier to use, and most importantly, larger diameter one that'll make it so much easier to service my water heater. Let me show you. As you can see, the factory valve is really small, and the biggest problem with it is actually just its diameter. You can see there, it's just not got a huge cross section to let the water and the sediment drain out of your tank. Whereas this replacement is a much more robust valve that has a much larger diameter, which will let the water come out faster and will let larger sizes of chunks of sediment come out without any problem. Let's get started and show you the process. All right, so there's a couple of things to mention before we get started. The first is that you'll need to make sure you pick a time and a day when you're not going to need access to hot water for several hours for this process. And there's a potential that you'll have to turn off all of the water to your entire home, not just the hot water. Now in my case, I'll show you in a little while how I can isolate just the hot water supply so that I still have cold water in the house so that people can still use the bathroom and that sort of thing, but they won't have access to any hot water while I'm doing this. All right, with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. So the first step is to turn off your heat source. My heater happens to be a gas heater, and so I've got this little dial I can turn which will adjust it all the way down to pilot. Yours may have a vacation mode, you can set it to that as well. If yours is an electric heater, the easiest way to turn off the heat source is simply to flip the breaker or unplug it from the wall. Next, go take a shower or do a load of laundry. You want to just make sure that you don't waste all that hot water, so put it to good use somewhere. So the next step is to locate the cutoff valve on your cold water supply for your heater. Mine happens to be that ball valve right there. This is up on top of my water heater tank. And to turn it off, you just twist that ball valve a quarter turn so that the handle is perpendicular to the direction of the pipe. All right, next you'll come and open a hot water tap at one of your faucets. You'll notice that water will continue to flow for a few seconds. It'll taper off and eventually stop as the pressure is relieved in the system. Okay, with the cold water supply off and a hot water faucet open, we're ready to attach a hose to our drain valve. You'll want to run the other end of this hose either to a floor drain or outside the house, ideally, so it will drain away from the house. Once the hose is attached, open your drain valve. In my case, this valve only requires a quarter turn to the left, and the valve is now open. Some of them will have a handle on them, others will require you spin them all the way so that they are completely open, like you're unscrewing this. It will vary. Consult your owner's manual just to make sure that you open that correctly. Now for most systems, this is all you need to do to drain the water out of the tank so you can remove that valve. But my system's a little different, and perhaps this is a newer style. This is a fairly new house. See, in order to drain the water out of the tank, you have to let air into the tank in some way. Usually this air can come in through a faucet, but I think I've got backflow preventers on my faucets, and no air ever gets into the tank through the regular plumbing just by opening a faucet. As a result, I have a couple of different options for how I can let air get into the tank. I could remove the hot water outlet to the house. That would just open up the tank and let air come straight in that way. I could also remove the cold water inlet at the top of the tank. That would also let air into the tank. I'm not a big fan of doing either one of those because I don't want to open up any more plumbing connections than I absolutely have to. The third way is you can use your pressure relief valve. Now, I know there's some folks out there who are going to get mad and say, no, don't touch your pressure relief valve, it's super critical. They're half right. This valve is extremely important. It is a safety feature of your heater. It is designed to let off pressure if the pressure ever exceeds a certain threshold, which might rupture the tank. However, those who say you should never touch it are just plain wrong. My owner's manual, I've checked it. It actually says you should test this every single year, and if it doesn't seat properly after a test, then you should replace it. They're inexpensive, they're easy to replace, there's no danger in opening them up to let air into your system. So that's how I'm going to do it. And as soon as I do that, you can hear now with air coming in, water is going out of my hose and out into the street in front of my house. And again, if your heater is not in a garage, so that you can run your hose out to the street, then you may have to find a drain or some other way to get all the water out. But you've got to find a way to get the water out of the tank and away from your house. Once your tank has started draining, go out and check the other end of the hose to make sure that the water is flowing freely. And as long as that water is flowing nice and freely, then you're good, just let the tank drain. But if the water slows down or tapers off or stops draining completely, you may have some sediment that's blocking up your valve at the bottom. And you may need to try and open and close that valve multiple times to clear out some of that sediment. And if that doesn't work, then you might have to get a little brave, take off the hose and jam a screwdriver in there and be ready to quickly put that hose back on in order to capture that water so it doesn't drain all over your floor. Okay, it's been draining for about 25 or 30 minutes and it's slowed down to just barely a trickle coming out. And so I think I'm ready to remove my hose and move on with the next steps. For this next part, you'll want to have a small little bucket handy. You'll probably also want to have some shop towels or some rags, because there is going to be a little bit of water left in here that you're going to need to clean up. So let's start by closing the drain valve. And then we can remove the hose that I was using for the drain. Now let's see just how much more water is still coming out. We'll hold this bucket here and we'll open the drain valve. And you can see there's nothing. So we are completely drained. So at this point I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of these towels down here to help soak up any water that's going to come out when I pull this valve out. You see the water has drained off, but there's still the thickness of the wall of the valve of height of water still inside the tank that is not able to drain out. And as a result, when I pull this valve, there is going to be a trickle of water that comes out. So I'm just going to put a couple of rags down here to kind of help soak that up. I have a few more handy just in case there's even more than I expect. Okay, now we're ready to remove the drain valve. Now these valves are installed at the factory and they're pretty tight. I'm hoping I can break it free with just a pair of pliers like this. If that's not enough, I've got a pipe wrench like this. And if that's not enough, I can add a breaker bar to my pipe wrench. All right, let's give it a twist and see what we get. Good news, this one was not too tight. I was able to break it free pretty easily. Now, depending on the type of valve you have in your heater, you may need different kinds of pliers or wrenches to get it out. But it should just thread out. And there's the extra water that I was anticipating. Get this bucket down here. Capture as much of that as we can. Once the water's finished draining, it's a good idea to grab a little brush, like a toothbrush or a small wire brush if you've got one, and use it to just kind of clean out those threads, make sure there's no sediment or junk left over so it makes a good seal when you put in the new valve. Alright, with this valve removed, now I can run to the store and construct something that has the same size threads to thread into the tank and the same kind of threads on the other side. Notice that they are different thread sizes and pitches. And one is for the garden hose, while the other fits the threads of the tank. So I'm going to go and get a different valve, but before I do, I like to take pictures on my cell phone of exactly what my fitting looks like. So we'll get some nice close-ups of that, as well as kind of some farther away shots so I know how much space I've got to work with. So there's a couple of good reasons to bring the old valve with you to the store. The first is that you can verify the actual sizes of everything. Here you can see I'm verifying it really is a 3/4 inch. And the second good reason is that now that I've got the valve there with me, I can use it as a reference when I'm assembling all of the new parts to make sure that they're roughly the same length and will fit in roughly the same area as the old valve. So I'm starting with a nice big 3/4 inch ball valve here, and I'm going to need to add a nipple to one end and an adapter to the other for the garden hose. The other nice thing about doing this in the store is that you can assemble the entire thing and make sure that it's going to be roughly the right size and shape. So here you can see I've picked out a 3-inch nipple, the ball valve itself, the small adapter that's going to go from the national pipe thread to a garden hose, and then this little cap on the end. And this will help keep dust and debris out of that ball valve and just kind of keep everything sealed up. All right, let's get these parts paid for and go back to the house. Okay, I'm back from the store. I've got all of these parts and I'm ready to start putting them all together. As I unpackage these though, I think I'm going to start a little bit of a holy war between those who think Teflon tape is the best thing to use to seal threads, which is perfectly reasonable. People have been using Teflon tape for a long time and it seems to work great. And those who think, no, you've got to use pipe dope. And I've heard that pipe dope is better than Teflon tape, and I've heard that Teflon tape is better than pipe dope. And then there's the crazy guys who say, no, you got to use them both. at the same time on the same threads. What? That's insane, right? Well, I'm not so sure. I've talked to a couple of professional plumbers who have all said, no, you don't want to use just Teflon and you don't want to use just pipe dope. You want to use both. Put Teflon tape on the threads first and then a coating of pipe dope on top of that, and then your connections will never leak. I've never done both before. I've always been either pipe dope or Teflon tape, depending kind of on my mood. However, I think for this video, I am going to go ahead and do both on all of the fittings here, except for this end cap. I'm not going to put anything on that. You want to keep those threads clean, and it already has a little rubber washer inside there, so you don't actually need anything on your threads for that. So let's go ahead and put some Teflon tape and pipe dope onto these threads, and we'll make that first connection. So I can't put Teflon tape on a pipe without explaining the correct direction to put it on. I've seen so many people on YouTube talk about the correct direction. They describe it correctly and then they do it backwards. So here's my tip, my rule for making sure that I do it right. When I'm going to thread this in, it is a righty-tighty kind of action, right? I'm going to be threading such that these threads are going to spin this direction, like that, into the fitting. So they are spinning this way, or the fitting will spin this way. So you want to have the tape put on so that when you spin that fitting, it attempts to continue in the same direction that the tape was originally applied, like this. So when I'm putting, it's almost like I'm spinning the fitting into the tape. So make sure that you pay attention, righty-tighty, and it should be such that if you grab it in your hands and spin it, the tape stays on. If I were spinning it the other direction, you'll see the tape bunches up and peels off. So if you put it on backwards, that's what's going to happen inside your joint, and the tape's basically useless. So make sure when you're putting your tape on, you put it on in the direction that you're going to be putting this into the fitting, like you're screwing it into the tape in the first place. And then your tape will do its job. All right, now normally when I've done pipe dope, I've been pretty liberal with it, but since I've already got tape on this fitting, I'm gonna be a little more scarce. I'm not gonna put quite so much on. I'll put a little bit on. But I'm really curious. Hit me up down in the comments if you're a plumber or if you have some more experience with this sort of thing. Is there really any good advantage to using both pipe dope and tape? Does it really make any difference at all? Is one perfectly fine? Is just pipe dope okay, or is just Teflon tape enough? Yeah, I'm really curious what everyone thinks. Go ahead and get that on pretty snug. I don't want to get it super crazy tight, but I do like to make sure that it's seated nicely. Okay. Last thing, let's go ahead and put this cap on. And this one really just needs to be, just basically finger tight. You can give it a little extra love. I wouldn't go too much because you don't want to crush the rubber gasket in there. That will ruin the watertight seal. All right, let's get it installed. Okay, so we're back at the heater and ready to install this valve. The first thing I want to do though is to make sure that this handle is really going to clear everything. So that's closed and that's open. And if this is installed all the way here, I can still close it. So I might want to have the orientation like this when it's finally tightened all the way, so that this handle is clear of any of the electrical components over here. Okay, so now that I know the orientation I want to end with, let's go ahead and start threading this in. It's about as much as I can do by hand. See if we can get at least one more full revolution with the wrench. Okay. Remember, this is in the open position, that's in the closed position. All right, with that installed, we are ready to refill the tank and check for leaks. Before we start to refill this, it's time to come and close your pressure relief valve if you had to open it in order to let air into your tank. I did, so I'm going to go ahead and close that now. Then make sure that you still have a hot water faucet open somewhere in your house, and turn the water supply to your water heater back on. So in my case, I just reach up above the heater and open this cold water valve. As the tank fills up, all of the air that was in the tank is now going to come out this faucet. And you can see when the tank gets completely full, then it'll switch from blowing air to blowing water. I'm going to let it run for a little bit longer to make sure we've bled all of the air out of the system. All right, that looks good. We can go ahead and turn this off, head back to the water heater and check for leaks. Okay, the tank is refilled. I'm going to pull off this cap and check for any leaks in there. No, that is completely dry. To be clear, this little cap is really just here in case the ball valve starts to develop a leak. Then the cap is just kind of extra insurance. You don't really need one, but it will also help keep the inside mechanism of that ball valve clean without having any dust and debris get into that. In particular, in my garage, I do a lot of woodworking and produce a lot of sawdust and things, and I don't want extra dust and debris to get up into that ball valve at all, so it's a good idea to put a plug on there. I'm going to feel around here for any wetness or leaking. I don't see anything, just a little pipe dope on my fingers. So the last thing I'm going to do is make sure the ball valve actually works. Clearly it closes properly, but let's see what happens when we hook up a hose. Turn it on and let it flush for a few seconds, and then turn it back off. Then we'll remove this hose. And again, we'll check to see if any extra water is leaking out. Okay, no leaks. So we can put this cap back on. And then the last thing we need to do is turn our heat source back on. In my case, I just twist this back to the desired temperature where it was before I started this project. If you have an electric heater, you'll need to turn your breaker back on. If you turn this all the way completely off, you may have to relight your pilot. Consult your owner's manual to make sure that you relight it correctly. All right, that's about going to do it for this one. Replacing this valve is going to make future maintenance on this water heater so much easier. These little valves that the manufacturers put in are tiny, and they just almost let a trickle of water out. Draining these tanks takes 20 minutes or a half an hour. Plus, if you get much sediment that builds up, the chunks of sediment can be too large to fit through that hole. As a result, the tank never drains at all. With a nice big 3/4 inch ball valve on there, I won't have any of those problems. Anytime I need to either drain or flush the tank, getting all the water that's in there out will be very, very quick and effective. And it's a much more robust valve that is not going to be prone to leak and should last well beyond the lifetime of the rest of the tank. Well, hey, I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen and maybe even learned a little something. If you have and you'd like to see more, think about hitting that little subscribe button, but no pressure. But as always, thank you very much for watching.